The super short version of a 10-year journey is we identified multiple instances of pretty grotesque animal cruelty, including confining beagle puppies in 2 foot by 4 foot cages where they're driven to insanity, surgical mutilation of animals without veterinary supervision or even anesthesia, and conditions so nauseating that even state inspectors said they struggled to breathe inside the facility. And instead of charging the facility, despite this overwhelming evidence that came from state inspectors, it came from whistleblowers who were employees, and it came from activists, they charged us with crimes initially. Went to trial. Chris was my co-counsel. I was representing myself in March 2024. They dropped the case because they realized how bad the PR was in the hope that this would go away. And so we decided in what was at the time considered by most people, maybe even to a certain extent me, as a shot in the dark, to file a petition for a special prosecutor to force the prosecutor to investigate the animal cruelty and issue a criminal complaint against Ridglan. Stefan actually drafted that complaint and the petition, or actually I think I drafted the complaint, but Stefan drafted the petition, which is a much more exhaustive and important legal document. And much to our surprise, in January 2025, the petition was granted. I think partly because the evidence was just so compelling. When you accumulate it all and you just listened to it all in court, which happened in October 2024, it was just like very clear to everyone in the room that something deeply wrong had happened at Ridglan Farms. But in October of 2025, after 10 months of supposedly investigating, the special prosecutor declined to prosecute Ridglan Farms and reach a stipulation, which very importantly was not going to protect even a single dog. None of the dogs would get out. And so at that point, we basically started saying everywhere we could to everyone who would listen and to many people who would not listen, including the district attorney and the special prosecutor themselves, if you don't rescue these dogs, we will. And we even set a date for it openly. We said we're going on March 19th. And on March 18th, one day before we had scheduled to do the open rescue, about 150 people showed up at Ridglan Farms, barged in with angle grinders, crowbars, scouted the facility, and came out with 30 dogs in our arms. So that kicked up a firestorm in the animal rights movement and frankly beyond the animal rights movement. And we've had very strange bedfellows supporting this campaign now, including extremely far left Congress people like Mark Pocan and extremely far right Congress people like Nick Langworthy in New York, you know, Nick adjacent to your district in New York. And also including Lara Trump, the daughter-in-law of the president came out in our support, and most recently RFK Jr. So, but partly because we were getting so much support, we decided after March 15th, even though they had arrested a bunch of us, we're going to go back again and try and get all the dogs out. And on April 18th, about 1,000 people showed up. A lot of us, not me, sadly, I was not there because they arrested me immediately. But a lot of us got very viciously assaulted by police. People had their noses smashed, broken bones, kicked unconscious, teeth lost by officers assaulting people, shooting them with rubber bullets, using chemical weapons like stinger grenades that Amnesty International has concluded are a violation of international law. But partly because of the enormous amount of attention, there was enough pressure on Ridglan that a number of separate animal rights organizations, including Laurie Simmons, Big Dog Rescue Ranch, just an amazing woman who I've met only in the last couple of months, secured the release of every single dog at Ridglan Farms. So that's like the 3-minute version of 10 years.
And tell us about the charges that are currently pending.
Oh, and the criminal case, of course. This is the Animal Law Podcast.
Right.
It's funny because it almost feels so irrelevant because all the dogs are free. It's like, whatever, you can charge me. So they're charging us only for March 15th at this point. They haven't charged any of the 1,000+ people who showed up on April 18th. Maybe partly because they realized, you know, their officers engaged in some serious misconduct. But they're charging us with 1 count of felony burglary for breaking into the facility with the intent to commit a theft, 1 count of theft for the 22 dogs removed, and 1 count of attempted theft for the 8 dogs that we tried to remove who were subsequently seized by the police and returned to Ridglan Farms. And finally, 1 count of felony criminal damage for supposedly doing, I believe it's like, is it $30,000 in damage they're claiming? Does anyone remember what the number is? It's roughly correct. It's something like that. It's in that ballpark. So those are the 4 counts. Trial was originally scheduled for September 28th, which was already a violation of our speedy trial rights, because in Wisconsin, a felony trial, if you demand speedy trial, has to be held within 90 days. And September 28th was like 120. It is fast, but I mean, I will say the speedy trial right is one of these rights that has been incrementally eroded by 100 years of terrible jurisprudence.
There's a million
Because
exceptions. Like,
yeah, so but that wasn't the case. I mean, even if you look 30 or 40 years ago, courts were looking at speedy trial very differently. There's been I've been looking at this case law, and our system has we think of factory farm as like a distinct and unique evil, and in many ways it is. Certainly in terms of the scale and severity of the suffering, nothing compares to what happens to animals. But the system has abused lots and lots of human beings too. And one of the classes of human beings who have abused are defendants. There's so many rights like the speedy trial right that accumulations of judicial decisions over the last 100 years have undercut, to the point that now the speedy trial is it's like a non-speedy trial right, effectively. But we're challenging that. I just filed the motion for reconsideration because the trial court is trying to push the speedy trial, supposedly speedy trial, back to January of 2027, which is 157 days beyond the statutory requirement. We'll see what happens. I suspect we're not going to prevail. We might have to appeal that one too. And we're going to trial in January of 2027.
okay, and nothing has been charged in the second. Yeah, you mentioned that. All right, looking forward to that too. Any other next steps in the right to rescue generally?
I'll just say one thing about the Ridglan case is that the word person does specifically appear in the statute in a very interesting way. And I'm very excited to litigate that. Because
In the necessity defense?
so it's in the defense of others statute in Wisconsin.
Okay.
And Chris knows this case law and the statute much better than I do because he did the briefing on this. But I think it'll lead to some interesting discussion in the courtroom. And it already did, because in our prior original case that was dismissed, one of the briefs literally said that the defense of other statutes only applies to persons, and dogs aren't persons, they're things, or something along those lines.
Yeah,
And I was
that's
like,
really
this is gold for us, because this points out the absurdity of the system.
Nicely said.
Yeah.
I mean, they could have just stopped. Dogs aren't persons. That would have been so much wiser.
Yeah.
What about? Can I ask about Marshall? Or is that all vague? I mean, since it's right down the road for me, I'm kind of.
Yeah, no, there's an
Curious.
active campaign that has been going on for decades. Marshall BioResources in upstate New York. It's about 45 minutes east of Rochester, where you're living. It has been a target of the animal rights movement as long as I can recall. A bunch of activists, Brian Pease.
Sure.
I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't talk about Brian. I mean, it's in the public record and it's in the news media. So I don't think Brian cares about us bringing this up. But he was charged and took a plea for rescuing a bunch of beagles from MBR back in the early 2000s, because he was caught in a field holding two beagles in his arms by a bunch of cops using infrared cameras. And so that goes back 20 years. People have been trying to get into Marshall,
Well, it's
get
hardly a
footage, and get the
bad thing
dogs
to
out.
say about him.
Well, I just think Brian has moved on to politics. He's running for mayor in San Diego. He's a lawyer. So
I don't know. The way Ridglan is playing in the press,
history.
I think it's probably a positive.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. So I just don't want to talk about someone else's criminal history. I mean, I better than anyone know that criminal history is not necessarily a bad thing, but Brian does have that criminal history. But anyways, I mean, partly because of that action, I think a lot of people decided Marshall was just too difficult to campaign against, because they are powerful in a way that even Ridglan was not. I mean, this is a massive multinational corporation that has offices in China and Japan and France. But I will say the international campaign to outline the criminal abuses at Marshall across the entire world is growing in momentum. There's this facility called Green Hill. I'm sure Chris knows about this. You may know about this as well. Stefan, you probably don't remember this because before your time. But in Italy, that was shut down because of a spontaneous open rescue. There was a big march to Marshall, and Green Hill was the Marshall facility in Italy. And a couple hundred activists showed up there. And I think it was just a dozen people, partly because they were just inspired by the amount of public support, decided to charge in and take a bunch of dogs out. And partly because of that action, Green Hill got shut down. And then there's MBR in the UK, where my wife lives, and she's obviously, done some open rescues there.
Yes, and she was on the podcast talking about that, if people want.
Yeah, no, I mean, amazing work. But my hope is, in light of what RFK Jr. and Brooke Rollins and Mark Pocan and so many people have said over the last couple of months, we don't have to do this, because frankly, I don't want to have to do this. It is extremely laborious, frightening, violent, oftentimes, when you're confronting these incredibly powerful armed industries and their supporters and law enforcement. I don't want another activist get hurt. I don't want another activist to have to go on trial. But if the government doesn't do the right thing, we've promised that we will by the end of the year. So that's our commitment.
Well, that's what the right to rescue and open rescue really is about. All right. Anybody, Chris or Stefan, did you want to add anything on that? I do have one more question, like, which is probably something for Wayne, but maybe for both of you as well. Dogs. It's the dogs. I mean, we can see that the dogs are like the breakthrough issue. How do we get everybody to go through that gate? Do you have a plan? Can we extend this to other animals? Because this really worked better than anything I ever remember.
For me, it's partly just social contact theory. I think one of the fundamental reasons the civil rights movement, the gay rights movement achieved success was just contact and intermixing between these different marginalized communities and mainstream establishment types, right? And there's a lot of evidence and examples, like, someone like Rob Portman, the senator in Ohio, who was very right wing and came out in the front for gay rights because his son was gay, or Dick Cheney, not exactly the hero of the left, whose daughter's gay and wanted to get married, and lo and behold, Dick Cheney turns. And I think the social contact theory works for dogs in two ways. One is there are so many people who kind of know someone who has advocated for dogs already, right? That they're like farm animal advocacy for animals that are not companion animals is incredibly important. There's so many powerful people doing that work, including you, Marianne. I mean, you wrote the piece, The Fox in the Hen House, that like changed my view of animal agriculture in pretty fundamental ways. But no, it really did. I mean, because honestly, it kind of demoralized me though, because I was like in law school thinking, oh man, I just like wasted my life going into this legal system that's completely broken. But I think dog advocacy is mainstream in a way that no other animal advocacy is. Like every community has humane societies.
Totally.
They're such like a dominant part of American culture and pretty much the culture of the West. And so you're exposed to people who've done incredible things for dogs, not just like donated to a charity or helped some dog who's been abused, but even rescue. Like there's so many people who know someone who directly rescues dogs. And so our ability to make the movement to rescue mainstream may be amplified by the fact that everyone knows someone who rescues dogs. But the other social contact theory that matters a lot is just direct contact with the dogs themselves. That when we tell stories about dogs and the suffering they go through and the joy they feel, just like how beautiful it is when they come into our homes and they gives us hugs and kisses and they get to play outside and sleep on a bed. I think the social contact people have with dogs and their intuitive understanding for what that means for the dogs is an incredibly powerful force for change. And the goal really is to use this social contact to extend that sympathy to all animals, to help them realize, because a lot of the people who are involved in the Ridglan open rescues, for example, are not just dog advocates, we're animal advocates. So just one concrete example that's just very suggestive. The number of people who I think have gone vegan from the Ridglan rescue campaign, and this is just the people involved in the rescue directly, probably numbers in at least the hundreds. Majority of the people involved in that open rescue effort were not vegetarians or vegans. They were probably people who had never even thought about farm animals. And I would guess that at least a couple hundred have moved their own personal dietary habits in the right direction because of the social contact with other vegans.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that's possible. I think I think it's hard sometimes for some people who are animal advocates, like really hardcore animal advocates, to understand like how people change, because it's not the way that necessarily I did, like, but somehow I do think it's possible, and I really hope that that's true, because it has been such a powerful moment in the movement. I mean, just extraordinary work. And kudos to all of you for the work that you're doing. Like I said, if it wasn't for the University of Denver, I don't know what we would do. Wayne would be in prison, and the rest of us would, be carrying signs in front of grocery store or something.